Magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craftworld I'm Brent, and tonight I'm here with autarch extraordinaire Brodie Middleton, whose Craftworld Ulthwe pointy ears recently finished 13th at the London GT in a field of over 700 players. Not only was Brodie the best performing Craftworlds player at the event, but the next best result for our beloved Space Elves was in 88th place. A good result for such a big event, but not exactly nipping at Brodie's heels. Thanks so much for being with us, Brodie.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I have a lot of questions about your lists and about how you think about scoring. That actually sounds really dodgy out of context. And especially about how you play the Avatar of Khaine, which you seem to be using more successfully than just about anybody else in the hobby these days.
It was great, yeah.
But first of all, can you tell us a little bit about just how you got into Warhammer initially?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, I'm Australian. I grew up in Melbourne, but I live in London now, so mostly playing in all the UK TC large events, which is super cool. There's super majors every month, it feels like, in the UK at the moment, so it's a great gaming environment. But yeah, I started playing, I think, at the tail end of second edition. I want to say I was like 8 years old or something. I think we didn't know the rules. We were just running around like making noises with Space Marines and stuff. So got into it super young, played for ages. I would say I hit a kind of like zenith in 4th and 5th edition when I was kind of at uni, played a lot and got into progress from the beginner armies, like mostly Space Marines and stuff. A mate of mine, it seemed like at the time every good player in Australia had an Eldar army, and it was this like mark of kind of advancement in the hobby that you could play these like super specialized armies. So that kind of attracted me and I got into it, and I spent most of 4th and 5th ed playing this like really fun list. There was Eldrad the Avatar and lots of Dire Avengers just running around in this like big blob. Had lots of aura abilities and stuff that you stacked around Eldrad in the middle, so that was a lot of fun. And then dropped out of the hobby for a little bit in 6th and 7th, as I felt it wasn't going in a really healthy direction, and I just took a break and did some other stuff. And then towards the back end of 8th, when the game's in, I think, a much healthier state, I got back into it, and I've been playing really, I would say, often and pretty competitively in the UK last couple of years through 9th edition. And I think it's the game's in a really, really healthy state. I don't think Craftworlds are they're pretty tough at the moment, kind of, but still definitely okay, definitely winnable. Just not as kind of face roll as they were when the codex came out. But yeah, game's really enjoyable to play at the moment. Eldar have got a release really fun, interesting, diverse book as well, so that makes it really enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think as you indicated earlier when you were getting into them initially, just a super high skill cap army that also like punishes mistakes horrendously. So yeah, they're not easy to play even for good players right now. And then if people who are listening who are new to this, it definitely can be, I think, pretty intimidating as a first army. 8 years old too. That's super cool. I thought I was killing it getting in at like 10. That's ridiculously young. So one of my patrons wants me to ask you the same question that I asked Boone at the beginning of my interview with him last week. If you were an aspect warrior, what kind of aspect warrior would you be and why?
Oh, Dire Avenger for sure. It's like my signature. Like if I went on Goonhammer, they'd have to make my little cartoon avatar a Dire Avenger.
That's
so love it.
Yeah, no, they're so cool. Why Dire Avengers?
I was really like embodied the kind of they're the most like, I guess, vanilla aspect, but also they embody the mobile, high damage output, a little bit fragile playstyle. And I've always really liked that kind of short range mobile kind of playstyle, where like not necessarily like I've never played a full combat army. I've always played like short to mid-range mobile shooting armies generally, and Eldar just really plays to that archetype super well, and I think the Dire Avengers really are the like epitome of that. So definitely Dire Avenger, plus I love blue, love painting it. I play all my stuff is painted as a Craftworld Abrasal, which is
me too. Yeah, awesome.
Light blue color, yeah.
Yeah, are you a Sotek green blue wash Ebersol player or a true
No,
blue?
I'll have to drop my Reddit profile because I post a bunch of pictures. I've been trying to do I don't know if anyone sees it on Reddit, but I do all the aspect warriors in plastic that I've been converting up and painting as bracelet over the last.
Oh, nice. Maybe I'll drop some images into this video in the future, and we can all gaze upon the glory that is your miniatures.
Yeah. Well, if you Google a bracelet autark, mine's the first image that comes up.
That's ooh, wow, that's prestigious. I'll also link it in the video description. That'll make it easy. So let's talk a little bit about what distinguishes your lists and how you play your lists from other well-performing Ulthwe lists. I mean, I think the thing that you just said, the Dire Avenger question was kind of a fluff question, but you gave a tactically nuanced answer, which is, I think, it sounds like you really excel at playing the midboard, which I think is super hard to do, and also probably what a lot of Eldar play hinges on. So when I looked up your list for the London GT, it looks like you have the standard Ulthwe package that is Eldred plus another Farseer and a couple of Conclaves and the 1-up Banshees and Scorpions and the 3D cannons. You have some Rangers to fill out patrols. But you also have the Avatar of Kane, right? Can you talk a little bit about what role the Avatar plays in your lists and how you're using it in the middle of the table?
Yep. So I think the key changes going from Nachman into Nephilim is a GT pack and the secondary choices that we have. You know, when the Codex came out, every Elder player in the world was just playing lists where they were building into to the Last and Strangleholders secondaries, which probably enabled a bit more list diversity because there's lots of ways to do both of those things. Like I like one in GT with Lynx, the Forge World vehicle, as a last choice. Like no joke. I was running to the last and just fire and fading this thing over a ruin every turn.
Yeah, that's
and I was like unkillable. So like, and you know, you've got that, and then you've got like so many different ways to play that. Whereas in Nephilim, you know, especially with Craftworlds having, I would say, one of the, like, you know, I think what is universally considered one of the weaker sets of secondary objectives, you really need to build towards that. You need to pick a direction and then build towards it. You can't necessarily just pick an army of things that you like and then have a coherent kind of pathway to a 90+ score, which you really need, you know, in this kind of tournament meta, where you know, you are going to play against Harlequins, Necrons, and Sisters of Battle, who are literally going to score 90 points without touching you.
Yeah.
You know, you need to have, you know, not just be able to compete on primary, but have secondaries that are getting, you know, 12+ minimum really per game. And the one the Avatar unlocks specifically is the hidden path, because you really need to be able to sit on a primary objective. And on UKTC terrain maps, which is the LGT plus all the other you know, super major events, like all the GTs around the UK that are all on the same map, most of them have midboard objectives that are in the open. So the idea of just taking a hidden path and standing behind a ruin for 5 turns is just not possible. So you need to be able to survive. And the Avatar with Fortune is pretty much one of the tankiest 280 points of anything in the game. Absolutely bonkers stat line, and was severely underestimated by my opponents, I think, perennially through all of my games. People were just like laughing at me when I just quickened him directly towards their deployment zone, and I'm like, you're barely going to scratch him, and they're thinking they're going to, you know, kill him in a shooting phase. It just never happened. So he unlocks a really a play style that enables you to take hidden path and really contest a midfield objective. And then Ulthwe unlocks makes psychic interrogation or ritual super reliable, both in terms of getting the cast off with the +1 and having an amazing relic that enables you to cast statistically 66% of your cast with a fate dice will be undeniable with the Ulthwe relic, which means that you can start picking psychic secondaries into psychic matchups. Like you can pick psychic interrogation into Thousand Suns. You can pick whatever into chaos. Like there's a lot of Chaos Marine armies out there with multiple casters and whatnot, and being able to pretty reliably get off at least 3+ psychic interrogations a game that are going to be undeniable just changes the options and changes the maths on what you can pick. So That was the thought going in. I honestly, I was a little bit like I didn't quite know which direction to go into after Nephilim came out, and I thought it was a bit of a hit to Craftworlds. Obviously, Craftworlds were an absolute S tier between when the codex were released and when Nephilim came out, but with multiple rounds of nerfs to stratagems points and secondaries, it's like really went. I didn't quite know what the right angle was and how to build an army that would reliably score 90 plus, and I felt certainly Hail of Doom does more damage, but has much worse secondaries. Inari's probably in the same boat. I think Inari's doing very well in a lot of US tournaments, but I don't think
that's dropped off. That was true in August. People have kind of unpacked how that works, but like Hail of Doom, I think the Inari build relies you to basically table in your opponent by turn 3, and that's how you score primaries. But yeah, can we just you're saying so many good things, and I want to stick with the Avatar just for a moment, because I know that there are a lot of players out there who really want to be able to make that model work. And you throw Fortune on the Avatar and you quicken it towards your opponent. You make it sound pretty straightforward, but other people are not having those results with that unit.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so starters, understanding what its purpose is. I think in some matchups, it's going to be an aggressor, and he's going to try to put pressure on my opponent. So it basically buys space, and I think that's what the Avatar does uniquely in the Eldar list compared to monsters. There's monsters in lots of armies, but they do different things. In Eldar, there is really only one or two units, the Avatar being one, a big unit of Wraithguard being the other, that are these like anvil or brick units that you can put in midfield. They're not going to die immediately, and they're going to force your opponent to react in some ways. Whereas most of the time, your Eldar react to your opponent. You're trying to bait them in, you're trying to make them move first, and then you're going to be able to use your mobility or whatever it is to pick where you want to hit and use that to outtrade your opponent. So over multiple turns, you have more stuff left, and that's essentially how Eldar play. And so adding the Avatar into that then creates a whole new dynamic where you're actually creating a part of the terrain, the battlefield that you can actually contest, and you're not just immediately ceding to your opponent. And that then buys space. So like the D cannons often would just get rushed, but if you've got to get through the Avatar to get to the D cannons, you're not getting to the D cannons. Or like creating these no-go zones that, again, going back to what I said at the start, what attracts me to Eldar is this like really high mobility, short range, high damage output kind of army. Well, you add in the Avatar as a bit of zone control, and then suddenly the things like Dire Avengers, Waltz Fighters, and Swooping Hawks just suddenly get a lot more space and agency over where they go and stuff that you just don't have if you're playing a pure kind of MSU like Hail of Doom or Beal-Tan, list with lots of aspect warriors.
Without a bully unit.
You're just not going to get that space. Yeah, exactly. So
so
that's what he unlocked.
Are there matchups though in which the Avatar does need to keep his fiery head down a little bit, maybe against Tau, or maybe against the new Leagues of Votann lists, or even maybe against some Sisters lists with a lot of Repentia?
Oh yeah, look. If you're playing against Tau and your opponent has two hammerheads, like he's just he's standing behind a ruin. But there's specific counterplay to that, which is notably Banshees slingshotting across the table to tag stuff, and so I played him. I think after I went undefeated in the main round at LGT, went 5-0. So then I went into the cutoff, and I think my round 6 opponent, it might have been round 5, was Astra Militarum, who did very well going 4-0 or 5-0 or whatever it was at the time. Oh, yeah. So he's really good player with a not great army, but at the same time, like 6 demolishers or whatever he had would kill the Avatar in a turn if he gets line of sight. So the Avatar sat behind a ruin until the Banshees tagged 3 Lehman Russes, and then he comes out.
You mentioned though that you're using the Avatar in part to make it possible for you to play Hidden Path, and I'm just going to remind people at home who are maybe new to this that if you're running Hidden Path without the Webway Gate, you're choosing an objective in the middle of the table or more than 6 inches from your deployment zone, and you're doubling down on your ability to control that objective. But it sounds like your Avatar is actually, in many matchups, not like there to defend that point, but is blowing past it to put pressure on your enemy, and it's that pressure that keeps them off the point. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and he does both, right? And depends on the matchup. So I think my second round opponent was Harlequins. Light Harlequin list, their standard, 7 or 8 boats filled with troops with pistols and stuff. When I saw the matchup, I just did the maths in my head of like how much damage does a single boat, a single Starweaver with 5 troops actually do to the Avatar, and it's like it's less than 1. It's a fraction
Wow.
of
Okay.
1 with both pistols and stuff, particularly because you ignore the mortals on a 5+ as
Right.
Ulthwe. And then once you realize that, it's like, well, just has no answer to this at all. And I moved the Avatar, like I took Hidden Path. I moved the Avatar into this central midfield objective that was in the open, so no line of sight blockers whatsoever, and stood him in the middle so he could heroically intervene any boat that came to tag it. And he didn't roll the dice the entire game. I didn't move him off the objective. I knew my opponent couldn't kill him, and I knew I was just going to get 15 victory points.
Yeah.
So the rest of the game was me playing 1,700 points versus 2,000, and locking in 15 secondary and 20 primary points.
Yeah, totally worth it for a 280 point model if you're getting like 35 victory points. That's crazy. Yeah, that's really, I mean, some of the stuff that you're just sort of blowing past, you've got some super sophisticated stuff going on here. So you're using the Avatar in synergy with the Banshees, which aggressively tie up the stuff that could threaten the Avatar so the Avatar can still play the midfield. Do you have any other tactics that you're using to make it possible for the Avatar to play the midfield in games where your opponents do have things, not like in that Harlequin game, that are a threat to your
Yeah. So it's
God.
using mobility and this kind of the surgical kind of damage output that Eldar have is like their archetype, really, just to pick off what your opponent has that can actually deal with the Avatar. So like if you've got your opponent that's got a lot of damage to stuff, I don't care. Like they're just not going to kill the Avatar, and then they've got something else with a railgun. Well, you go and kill the railgun, and your game just gets a lot easier. So
yeah.
and generally, you should have agency as the Eldar player in what you target a lot of the time. I mean, with all the mobility stuff, and then often putting stuff in, Warp Spiders will start off the table. Often the Dire Avengers will start off the table. So you've got these super high damage output units that can come in and pick off what you need to pick off, plus the Banshees are super high threat range. So really understanding what is in your opponent's toolbox. But even then, I think the thing that people underestimate about the Avatar is that actually there's a lot of armies that just have no genuine answer. Like there is nothing in a Light Harlequin army, which is the highest win rate army in the game, right at the data slate. There is nothing in a Light Harlequin list that can kill the Avatar. Nothing.
Right.
Same as Necrons. Like as long as you have Fate dice to tank the Menhirs, the Silent King's Menhirs that do 6 damage, everything else in the Necron army, in a meta Necron army, is damage 2 or damage 1, and they're just going to bounce off the Avatar. So you've got two out of the 3 of the top tier meta armies just have no answer to realistically killing an Avatar, and I think that's something people don't really think about. And then you can, that just lets you bully armies that you would normally just get run over by. Like there's a lot of Eldar lists that would just get run over by Necrons or, Harlequins or whatever it is. Like I think the Harlequins have a 75% win rate versus Craftworlds. Like ironically, it's like that if you look at the like matchup data on 40kstats.com, Craftworlds actually statistically have the worst matchup into Harlequins.
Interesting. Okay. I'm not that surprised. They're very mobile.
Yeah. So, it's really good meta pick. Not sure he's necessarily the best pick now after the balanced data slate.
What is it about the balanced data slate that has you doubting?
I was expecting Necrons to get hit a bit more, and I'm expecting. I mean, so I'm talking about the like high end competitive.
Sure.
The guys that you're expecting in the top 20 or 30 at these big UK events. I'm not necessarily talking about
at your local club.
Smaller GTs or going local club. It's like really pointy end where like I can almost list the players in the meta and what armies they're going to play and who you're expecting to play and if you go to an event and you're winning games, you're probably going to run up against someone like Vic VJ, who's I think the top number 1 ranked ITC player in the world, and he's playing Emperor's Children. 4 out of the top 8 at LGT were Emperor's Children, I think, and they're just going to be everywhere over the next couple of months because they didn't get hit in the data slate. So I don't think the Avatar has an answer to the Emperor's Children list because you can't kill those Terminators, and you actually might die to the Blastmaster spam. So
yeah, the Blastmaster spam is because they're still doing 2 damage, and so I mean that adds up pretty fast. But I would think, did you come up against Emperor's Children?
No.
No,
I played
okay.
I played 2 Chaos Marine lists, one Word Bearers with Max Possessed, and 1,000 Suns with Flamers, which was just hideous.
Yeah.
Flamers are so broken. Oh my god.
Do you remember back in like second, I don't know how long you've been in, but in some very early edition, the Avatar was just invulnerable to flamer weapons because he's made of fire?
Yes, I definitely remember that.
Good times,
Yep.
good times. Very thematic. It always seems a
Yep.
little bit unjust when someone's damaging
I
him
remind
with
my
a flamer.
opponents about that.
Yeah.
You know, when they're about to shoot at him with a melter gun or something, it's like, well,
Do you know he's made of fire?
Back in the day,
This is
you
ridiculous.
wouldn't be able to do that.
Cool. So if you could just give a very general overview of how you think about primaries, I think that would be really helpful for players who are struggling with that aspect of the game, specifically as a Craftworlds player.
Yeah, so I think the best thing about playing 40k at the moment is that in almost all tournaments you go to, you have a set terrain map that you can look at and practice on before the event, or it's player place terrain, which is just about the best thing that can happen for Craftworlds. So what that means is that you will know before the event how realistic it is for you to score primaries without getting shot. So are the objectives in the midfield behind obscuring terrain or not? So if you like, I mostly play on the UKTC events, so I frequently I have a UKTC terrain set at home. I set a table up. You can map the whole thing out and just work out, okay, how can I score objectives on all these 6 missions without getting shot? And if I can't, then how do I survive getting shot? So I think there's 2 ways to do that. I think the gold standard Craftworld midfield objective sitting babysitting task force is Baharoth and a Wave Serpent. I think
Sure.
Wave Serpents, both of those units are probably 2 out of the best 4 or 5 units in the Elder Codex. I definitely think their order includes. Baharoth can just go off and basically you'd move a Wave Serpent up, which is quite a durable vehicle, particularly with a couple of fate dice. You tag him, just put his front nose over the objective. Baharoth goes off and does his thing, shoots, and then he does his Cloud Strike ability to then redeploy after shooting or fighting to wherever he wants, and putting him, and this is super janky, but you put him right between the 2 front tines.
That's exactly what I do too. Yeah, because nobody can ever be close to him.
Yeah, exactly. So you're now character protected because there's no possible angle that you can get on him without where he is the closest model, because you'll always have an element of the Wave Serpent poking forward, and often he'll be within 3 inches. So if they try to charge the Wave Serpent, he can heroically intervene, and then you can either stay there, or if you've just lost the objective anyway, then I love heroically intervening and then consolidating and just Cloud Striking somewhere else.
Yeah.
After you heroic to then go threaten something in your turn. So I think that's like the number one thing. And half of the primary points that I've scored since the Codex came out are exactly that setup where you've got a Wave Serpent with Baharoth there making the objective obsec, and you've got 2 models there, so your opponent can't just steal it away with 1 or whatever. So that's one. Then part 2, I think it's important to understand that it's a 5-turn game, and you generally win as Eldar by out trading your opponent using your mobility and damage output to take away his resources, so that by the time you get to turn 4 and 5, even though you're going to lose stuff as well because it's really fragile, 500 points of Eldar in turn 4 and 5 will very likely beat 500 points of just about anything else in the game.
Yeah.
Because that last 500 points will be the best units you have. It'll be Baharoth, it'll be Swooping Hawks, it'll be your fast you're on bike, and it'll be a couple of little aspect squads. That'll be all you'll have left.
Yeah.
And that will outplay absolutely anything else in the game, not just in terms of damage output and utility, but in mobility. And when you start getting into, I reckon a fair chunk of my games, I just win, even though I'm down on points, I win by outscoring my opponent with huge swings on turn 5, going second in particular. And Craftworlds really lean into that. So I think one of the things, when we were talking about this session, I was thinking about, what I would want to talk about or advice I would give. And the number one thing is planning as Eldar. You need to be planning for a 5-turn game and thinking about your path for winning points through turns all the game, and not just overcommitting stuff early, because I find Eldar have a huge advantage at the end of the game with the mobility and utility that they have. So often you're giving up primary points in turn 2, so that when you've lost a bunch of stuff and your opponent's lost a bunch of stuff, you've got still great resources to score.
What does giving up primary points in turn 2 mean? Does that mean you're scoring maybe 4, or are you trying to get to 8? Is it okay to score 4 in turn 2?
Almost always, like on most missions, you've got a home objective, so you just take 4.
Yeah.
Sometimes on a hold 2 mission, like if I think Tide of Conviction's pretty popular at a lot of events, so you have to hold 2. Data Scry Salvage is very popular. But on UKTC maps, and I'd imagine on most maps, like at least one of those objectives is going to be behind a ruin, so you can probably just sit Baharoth or something in Zobsec behind there, and you're not going to necessarily die. And then try to use your mobility and stuff coming out of Deep Strike, or the Banshees running across the table to really out-trade your opponent. 110 points of Banshees almost always kills more than 110 points of stuff, same as Dire Avengers.
Sure.
So that you're trying to set yourself up for success in the mid-game by having the resources that you need. So, your fragility and stuff isn't as impactful. But yeah, certainly I almost never would get a 12 like on primary in turn 2, whereas that's the opposite of like a a board control or a tough durable list like Necrons, or like the Chaos Space Marine builds that are coming out with lots of Terminators, where they'd expect to move on to the midfield and get a contest every objective, get a 12 turn 2. Like that's just not how you play as Eldar. You really have to give some ground early so you can keep scoring later.
Yeah, so it's right. I mean, the notion that a lot of the game as an Eldar player is about planning to win on turn 4 and 5. I think that's one of the reasons why they're pretty hard for new players. But it seems like in order to do that successfully, right, somebody who's playing at your level, even if you're going to do that, part of your plan has to be denial, right? So what are you doing to make sure that your opponents are not scoring so much in the first few turns of the game that you still are able to catch up, as you were saying, on turn 5 when suddenly you outscore them?
Yeah. No, I think it's a good, really important point. So 2 options. One, you just kill everything on the objective, which you can.
If you kill everything, you win.
Always,
yeah.
You can almost always do for objectives in the open. And if go back to like Data Scry Salvage, which is a 6 objective mission, 2 of the objectives in the middle of the table are in cover, 2 are not. So if your opponent wants to get an 8, they're putting something out in the open on that objective, and that's where I love playing. That's a really good position to be in, because then you've got a clear target.
Right.
You stack Guide, Doom, Jinx, and you'll kill anything that's on that objective, and then your opponent's now do a 4, and then so that's the easy mode. I think everyone can do that. The harder part is just stacking a lot of the tricks that you have to turn something that couldn't normally contest an objective into contesting it. So that's using Will of Assyrian to make Banshees OBSEC, or even Dire Avengers OBSEC, either charging something and then using Paladins and Consolidates to tag multiple objectives, even get onto your opponent's home objective, or Dire Avengers, like with a Fate dice, you can advance 13 inches and then shoot and then fire and fade another 7, so you can cover 20 inches, so you can test almost any objective in the midfield with that. There's lots of ways to make them OBSEC, like Stand Firm or Will of Assyrian and stuff, and often you can string out a big squad to cover 2 objectives, so that kind of thing. And it just feeds back into that really enjoyable, fun, dynamic playstyle, which is mobile, short-ranged, outplaying your opponent, stacking lots of buffs, stacking lots of utility, to do that, rather than just kind of boring, like, oh, I've got this big combat unit, I'm just going to run it across the table, and that's how I stop you scoring or whatever. So it's really rewarding, because there's so many layers to it, and lots of different mobility tricks.
Yeah, no, for sure. I really like what you said about forcing your opponent in the early part of the game to trade units in order to score additional objectives, because usually Eldar are so good at killing that those units that are being committed to midfield objectives you can pick up, and then you are doing some trading also for denial, which is cool. But also, the secondary game is super important, right? You mentioned earlier that Eldar don't have, I think we can all agree, that Eldar just don't have as strong secondaries as the leading factions in the game. And I think that's one of the reasons why we saw Craftworlds drop out of top performing positions. You mentioned Psychic Interrogation, which is a favorite, especially in Ulthwe lists, for the reason that you said, the Ghost Helm, right? You can, with the Fate Die, you can make it more or less reliable in virtually any matchup, especially if you then quicken the Psyker out of there, even if you have to take a risk. But I think you mentioned Hidden Path, and I think there are probably still some maps, right, in which Hidden Path might not do the trick. And then what else are you leaning into? And how do you know when not to use Hidden Path? There's the other one.
Yep. So, I mean, the game tells you when you can't use Hidden Path, because unfortunately it's unpickable on a lot of maps. Like, you can't pick it on what's I'm just looking at the map list, like Tide of Conviction. Your 2 home objectives on your half of the map are less than 6 inches from your deployment zone. Same with Secure Missing Artifacts, Scouring, etc. So there's a lot of missions you just can't pick it on anyway, because you don't want to pick the objectives on your opponent's board half. That
if they're deep in your opponent's board half, that's a no, right?
So I found Scout the Enemy is quite good. It's people read the description, which says that it completes at the end of the turn if you're rangers, or at the start of your command phase, next command phase if you're non-rangers, and they just assume that you can only do it with rangers, or that they only want to do it with rangers. But like a Warlock that's Lookout Serp protected can just go sit behind a ruin or next to the Wave Serpent and do it 6 inches out of your deployment zone. There's plenty of, like, any model in the army, even the Wave Serpent can do it. I did that a couple of games. The Wave Serpent did scout the enemy while moving up into the middle of the field.
Oh, that is clever. So, that's never occurred to me. That's so obvious.
Yeah, wow. There's no keyword. There's no keyword restrictions to who can do it.
Right. Yeah.
So only rangers do it at the start of the turn, or at the end of the turn. So that's pretty reliable. Like, even if you do it in midfield and you never get into your opponent's deployment zone, you score a 10, and that's better than Rod, because Rod most of the time you get 8. It's really hard to get a 12. So that's a good one. Often better than banners, because it's really hard to hold banners as Eldar. So that's quite reliable. And then the thing that really unlocks that is that when you get to the end of the game, and again, you're in this, like, what I call the power zone for Eldar, which is, turn 4 and 5, where there's only 500 points each left. And then suddenly, like, your Swooping Hawks get to the other side of the table.
Yeah.
You will have Assyrian them, so they're OBSEC, and they can shoot, and they do scout the enemy, and your opponent, doesn't have the resources to kill them, and they're in your opponent's deployment zone contesting their home objective and doing an action. So I found I was getting a lot of swingy points at the end of the game, getting a 4 on that for being in your opponent's deployment zone.
Yeah.
With non-ranger units, like Barhoth will do that at the end of the game for sure. Swooping Hawks, etc. So that was a really good pick. I picked that pretty much half the time. The other one was Wrath of Kane. As long as you're running probably at least 2 melee and 3 or 4 shooting aspects, I think that's pickable. I think most meta lists are running either 2 Banshees or 1 Banshees, 1 Scorpions, maybe some Shining Spears. Because the shooting element of Wrath of Kane is the easy part for sure playing Eldar. It's much harder to consistently kill stuff in melee. But
do you think with Wrath of Kane it only makes sense into MSU tradey lists? Or would you ever pick it against something like CSM?
I think depends on the CSM list, because if you think about CSM with 3 or 4 characters, because characters are great targets for it. Like Baharoth will go and kill a Master of Possession every day of the week, and he's an Aspect Warrior. So for anyone playing at home, all the Phoenix Lords have the Aspect Warrior keyword. Unfortunately, the Avatar doesn't. Otherwise, life would be a lot better for Eldar. But all your Phoenix Lords plus all the Aspect Warriors, and you want to kill one unit shooting and combat. So often it's the Phoenix Lords doing both, or like doing one of them while you can do the other.
Right. Yeah. No, and especially Baharth late game, that totally makes sense. I'm always a little shy about Wrath of Kane because I don't like having it dictated how I can kill stuff. I worry that it creates inefficiencies. I tend to be really shy about that one, but I know that people are having some
and that's
work
why,
with it.
as you say, you really want to pick it into MSU. Like if your opponent's got little trader units that are great that you want to kill anyway, definitely harder, but at the same time, you can almost you can pretty much expect to get it 2 turns for the 4, and then a couple of other turns just for the shooting. So even then, you're probably looking at a 10.
Sure.
With just playing normally, not really doing too hard. And 10's pretty much par for the course for a lot of Elder secondaries now, unfortunately. So
yeah,
there's definitely games where you take it because it's better than something else rather than something you really want.
I think that's true, and it's unfortunate too, because 10, like, you can have a 10, but it's not. You mentioned 90 points before. It's just not good enough to get you to the 90 if that's where you're coming in.
Yep.
Consistently. One of my patrons wanted me to ask you whether you've seen the rumors circulating on the internet. I don't know if it's rumors or just kind of sentiment that maybe in the next chapter approved, it would make sense for Wrath of Kane to trigger off the Avatar.
I was expecting that in the starter slate, and we didn't get it, which is quite disappointing. And I think there's been a lot of commentary across the internet already from content creators and whatever about how kind of disappointingly light the balanced data slate was. Not necessarily because of the win rates and that armies in the middle like Craftworlds. So, Craftworlds is a little bit under 50% win rate, but it's still fine. It's not necessarily win rate that we wanted. It was quality of life.
Yeah.
Because the secondaries, the secondaries, it's not the power level. It's the fact that they unfortunately just force you into really limited build paths to be able to consistently score. And I think that's what we're seeing with the only really narrow Ulthwe lists that are picking the same secondaries every game are really able to function. So I was hoping that would change. I think that makes a lot of sense, not just thematically, because it's the most obvious thing in the world.
So
like,
thematic,
why can't you score Wrath of Kane without the Avatar? But that and Hidden Path getting slightly changed to make it pickable on more maps is another change I was expecting, and I was hoping that Shroud Runners would be able to trigger Scout the Enemy. So if I was if I was speaking with Boone, actually, he might have said the same thing on the previous podcast. We basically had the same conversation at LGT and pretty much expected those to be the 3 kind of light touch but really good quality of life, like make Eldar just more enjoyable to play. I think they would move the win rate up for sure, but mainly just enable some more fun builds. So hopefully that comes in. I would expect they do another balance pass of the secondaries in the next book that we get, but that's going to be another 3-4 months away. So
yeah, that's what I'm figuring. I'm just kind of assuming that the reason the balance slate was so light is that they want to leave stuff like new secondaries for the next chapter approved, which when you're playing a lot of 40k, 3 to 4 months seems like a really long time. I'm sure that from GW's perspective, it seems like tomorrow, but
yeah, I mean, print. How long does it take for them to get stuff in their printers? Is like 6 or 8 months or something. So
yeah, no, it's so true. Can we talk about warp spiders a little bit? A lot of people love warp spiders. They insist that you should never leave home without them. Other people point out that the -2 AP on the weapons against Armor of Contempt stuff and cover ends up coming a bit short. So how do you think about warp spiders? Are they auto includes? What are you using them for?
I don't think they're auto includes. I think there's specific use cases for them, and the specific use case in this list is that they clear. Like, I wanted something that wasn't on the table that would deep strike, and I didn't have the CP to reliably put another Dire Avenger squad in reserve, and so yeah, it's essentially I wanted to be able to come in and threaten my opponent's backfield or threaten something wherever I needed it without spending the CP. They're a great unit for that. They're particularly good at killing stuff on your opponent's backfield, and then you redeploy your Sweeping Hawks and Barharoth in there, and that certainly happened a couple of games where my opponent left cultists or something on their backfield, and rather than go try to kill the Marines in cover with Armor of Contempt, I just go absolutely nuke a cultist squad, and then suddenly I've got Warp Spiders, Barharoth, and Sweeping Hawks sitting on my opponent's backfield objective. So they're really good for that. I don't think too much of the AP1, AP2 into Armor of Contempt and cover. Yeah, it's certainly a downgrade from where it was previously, but you're still with Doom Guide and Jinx, like Jinx being still pretty reliable in Ulthwe because you get the +1 to cast.
Sure.
That changes the mass a lot. And they're still, you just don't shoot at Terminators and you'll still love them. So
is there any argument at all for Shadow Specters instead?
I wish, because I have 10 Shadow Speckers that I spend. I reckon a good 20 hours painting meticulously all those ridiculous sharp
cool
edges that I was highlighting in the Resident. I actually took them to an event last year in the AdMech meta where they absolutely tore through a couple of big Skitarii squads. So that was pretty fun. But I wouldn't run them anymore, unfortunately, because they're more expensive than Warp Spiders for a much worse anti-infantry profile, and I think the big gun it needs to be AP4 and strength 8.
Yeah, and the game is all volume of fire right now, I think. So I totally agree. I know there's some people who love them.
And the Fire and Fade nerf to once per game is a bit of a death knell as well. So maybe in Biltan, if you can stack exploding 6s and battle focus 3 inches, then they've got a bit more play. But yeah, I don't think they're a bit of a relic, and I suspect they'll get legends soon, which is
so
a
sad.
shame. I was saying on an Elder Discord the other day that I think half the Elder stuff's going to get moved to legends in the next update, and I'm looking at my display case or my display cabinet that's got a Lynx, 3 Hornets, 2 Reindeers, 10 Shadow Spectres.
Yeah,
sitting on it looking.
That's like mine too. I really hope we keep the rates here. I have a second unbuilt Lynx in my drawer that's like 2 years old that is going to be worthless. No, I'm hoping that most of that stuff gets rebooted and moved over to GW standard instead of being a Forge World model. But it's not likely, is it? They got to keep the rates here, though, right? I mean, it's so iconic.
Yeah, I think they'll keep the rates here. Hopefully, I think I think we'll lose the Shadow Spectres. I think they're even no longer on the website, but we'll see how we go.
Yeah, sad news.
Okay. So, and you were talking about Warp Spiders. I want to highlight another use.
Okay.
I think is really one that I'm probably going to take to the Coventry GT, which is the next super major in a couple of weeks. Swift Strikes and Masterful Shots, I think, is probably the best Craftworld combination outside of Ulthwe. So Swift Strikes lets you advance. It means you remain stationary in the shooting phase.
Yeah.
Which in Craftworld World means that you can battle focus after advancing, or move and shoot heavy weapons. So that unlocks a whole bunch of janky stuff. And then the second part of that is Ignore Cover, which Wolf Spiders absolutely love for the reasons you outlined, like ignoring, cover just means that you bounce off Space Marines a lot less. And essentially, when you add that to Fate dice, your Warp Spiders can move 18, shoot fully, and then you take the Web of Deceit Exarch power that lets once per game redeploy, and then you redeploy them like Swooping Hawks. And then if you add in lots of Swooping Hawks as well, you've got these like 3 or like multiple little MSU squads of Swooping Hawks, if you like, units that can go with Fate dice 18 or 20 inches and shoot, and then redeploy. And depending on the terrain, that can be pretty crazy. Like on UKTC, all of the medium L's in the middle of the map have windows. So if you go 18 or 20 inches, you can tag the ruin and shoot through it and just nuke whatever's on the other side, which makes that super powerful. It would be less powerful on like GW terrain and stuff, but I think that's probably where I'm going to go. So I'm very likely to be running a 10-man Warp Spider squad.
10 Warp Spiders. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's actually really scary. Hear me out. Is there any argument for Swift Strikers plus Children of Prophecy and just throwing a Warlock in there with Conceal Reveal to somewhat mitigate the loss of the ability to ignore cover?
I think Ignore Cover is too important army-wide. It's an absolutely insane army-wide trait because you can't always just kill one unit that you're stacking debuffs on. If you think about like what's in the meta at the moment, it's going to be Necrons with 8 or 10 units, or they're putting 3 big Scarab blobs in your face. Well, you can't just rely on Doom to kill one Scarab unit because there's more, or whatever it is. There's got to be you got to be able to kill multiple targets, and I think army-wide Ignore Cover is pretty bonkers.
And you don't worry about losing the access to reliable psychic.
So I think what I'd still do, you can still reliably cast Psychic Interrogation. It's only a 4+, so all you're losing is the auto deny, which just reduces the number of matchups that you might pick it in. So you still absolutely take Psychic Interrogation in matchups that it works. You just don't take it in the other, let's say 10 or 20, where there's multiple denies.
Sure.
So it just means you need to unlock secondaries in other ways, like that Swift Strikes list loves doing behind enemy lines or engage or rod a lot more than Ulthwe.
Right.
So there's different ways, but I think that's the next iteration, and it's a super fun way to play as well. But
cool.
Yeah, Wolf Spiders, good to go. Like them, I've used them in lots of lists.
So something that I've learned from the comments on these videos and from the emails that the content generates is that the people who watch this stuff include top tournament players, but also just like total beginners, people who are returning to the hobby after, in some cases, decades away. What advice would you give to people listening who might be in the process of assembling their very first 9th edition army?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in that position for sure. Like, I stepped out for all of 6th and 7th ed, pretty much. So I stopped playing in 2013 and picked up, I think it was Marines again or something in 2019, 2020. So I took that 6 or 7 year break when I didn't think the game was very good. I think advice would be enjoy the fact that there is just so much content on the internet these days. Like when I was playing in 4th and 5th edition, there was just old janky, like, forum message boards that were, terribly set up. You'd like make it a comment and then like refresh the page every 5 minutes, waiting to see if you got any spicy replies or anything like that. It's nothing like it is now. So definitely get involved in all the different groups. Like if I think about even just in London, I'm in about 6 or 8 different WhatsApp groups.
Whoa, okay.
Different Discords, and these aren't just competitive ones, right? Like there's still. I got a few mates, like the David Gaylards and the Vic VJs and these like top 2 or 3 guys in the world that, I talk to separately. But then for the most part, it's just the wider community from modeling. Like I do a lot of hobby stuff as well. Like I love my aspect warrior conversions, love posting them on Reddit and all that kind of stuff. So embrace the age that we live in with all the social media. There's so much content, definitely. And then the other bit would be, just go in to try to learn, like don't have expectations of winning. It's a long mountain to climb to get the knowledge and, nuance and depth and stuff of 40k. So just get in and get started. Nothing can, substitute for just getting the reps in. And then when you're ready to start making the leap between beginner or intermediate to advanced, then really I think it's helpful to approach 40k as like a sport or something that you practice. So rather than just playing games against random armies, like if you do want to get competitive, then start practicing like a competitor. So like play against other opponents that are on the same wavelength with competitive lists on the right maps. Don't be afraid to get your army out and set it up on a terrain, on a mission to see how it actually fits together and if you can deploy everything, all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I think in some cases, people who are coming back to the game from after being away for many editions are sometimes worse off than people who are just starting, because you have all these expectations. I remember I came back at the very beginning of 8th, and I was just so out of touch with what the current rules value and how you win games. So it can be, I think, really surprising and kind of jolting to come back thinking, well, I played back in 4th in 5th edition or 3rd edition. It can't have changed that much, and discover that you're just totally out of your depths. So I like what you said about making use of all of the resources, because that's one thing we didn't have in earlier editions.
You learn by osmosis. Like you don't need necessarily, you set up, you get a lot out of playing games for sure, but you also, you don't underestimate just listening to someone. People talk about matchups or watching battle reports on YouTube or whatever it is. You get a lot out of that, just watching people play and how they talk about things, how they value certain rules or interactions or strategies or whatever that you might not think about. I think really helps a lot. And there's a lot of, premier content online. Like, this podcast is a lot of podcasts. Goonhammer is a great resource.
Love Goonhammer. So good.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that when you're building a list, you think a lot about how you're going to score the secondaries. And I think one of the problems that new players have when they build lists is they think almost exclusively about how the list is going to kill stuff. Can you talk about what are the things that need to be balanced, the concerns that need to be balanced when you're putting a list together?
Yep. I would say I literally build a cheat sheet when I have a new army. Like I went and played Grey Knights for a little bit, and I went to an event with Grey Knights, and I literally had a like notepad next to me that said like command phase, do X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
You know, so don't shy away from that. Like it's okay to have a game plan that, you know, sometimes when you're beginning, you actually just need to write the game plan out. I have a game plan, but it's in my head. You know, it's okay to write it down. So think through, you know, what kind of your secondaries are and how you actually score them. So if you're going to pick R&D or scout the enemy, well, you know you have to do that action 4 or 5 times. You know where you need to do it. So actually, where are you deploying stuff, and where does it go first turn? And I really like the idea of, and I do this quite often, is just set a table up at home with terrain on it, and set your army up and just have a fake deployment in first turn. Because if you take out your opponent's army and just think about the mechanics of your own army, of how it deploys, and then where you move stuff in turn 1 to like score primary in turn 2 and score your secondaries, then that helps like get you into the flow. Because once you're into the flow of like scoring those every turn and that kind of stuff, it just gets a lot easier. So knowing how your army deploys and where everything goes turn 1 and 2 makes that a lot easier, and you don't need to play an opponent to do that, to practice that.
Yeah, I love that battle plan suggestion too. That's a thing I do too, especially when I'm playing an army that I don't have a lot of experience with. You know, you write down what are the key stratagems that I need to remember, what are the things that I'm going to do on each turn. It's so frustrating to be playing a game and realize like, oh, I got those guys out of the transport, but that I didn't then move them and declare the.
Oh yeah, man. Like I printed out. Goodness. You know the Wahapedia website, or
I sure do. Yep.
So Wahapedia has all the rules, and in every army rules page, it has a section that breaks down stratagems by phase.
Oh, it's so useful.
And it is the most incredible resource. And I've printed that out and taken it to games. And you know, you go to start of the shooting phase. Okay, well, I can, you know, these are my stratagems, and you can pick them out, and it really makes it nice and simple. So I think to close that out, like the advice is don't shy away from just being really structured. Don't think that you need to rock up and remember everything or whatever, especially if you're beginning and you can play against other beginner players where you don't mind taking a couple of hours just to go through, you know, the basics and focus on the mechanics of the game. Then it helps a lot. And even like competitive players go to events and have cliff notes written on a notepad because they don't know what they need to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, nobody has totally encyclopedic knowledge of every. So there's somebody out there, but I've never met that person. Do you have any other generally useful tips for successful executive function at the table? I know how hard it can be. I think even for experienced players to keep track of everything, but if you're new, like fate dice plus sub-faction bonuses plus stratagems plus psychic powers and data sheets, all while you're trying to play on the clock, do you have any other strategies or tricks for making that aspect of the game easier? A couple of macro ones or a macro one and then a couple of micro ones. So at a macro level, it's really just important to understand what your army does and what the strategy is at a high level. So, excuse me. If you've played video games or something, you know, you'd be familiar with, you know, different, like you look at an RTS and different factions in RTS play different ways, right? And I used to play a lot of League of Legends, which is a MOBA like Dota, you know, you play teams of 5. And the 5-on-5 team fights, depending on what's in the teams, have like very, very like specific strategies where you might say front to back. Well, front to back means that your strategy for your team is to kill your opponent's frontline tanks, because you can chew through them quickly, and then you go for the backline. Or you might have a composition with an assassin, so you're trying to kill the backline carries, and then you can kill the rest of your opponent. So understanding what your kind of core functional aims are. Like I was in the military back in Australia, right? And in military strategy, it's called the I've just completely blanked on it now. I was in the Army for 10 years. But the main effort, or like what everything focuses on the main effort, and you like to the exclusion of all else. And if you win that, then you win the battle. Sure.
And you don't devote resources to things that don't support the main effort. So understanding that and understanding what your army does stops you making like silly decisions, or like everything has a job. Don't send a unit to do something that isn't coherent with the rest of your like game plan. And it goes back to really thinking through in a structured way. On turn 1, these guys need to go and do this, that kind of thing. So being really structured. And then at a micro level, I certainly, when I was getting back into it, I used a lot of like counters. I had all the little stratagem cards there set up, and I had my little notepad there saying, turn 1 do this, turn 2 do this, whatever. So until you get into the swing of and have the experience, like, just use whatever resources you need, and don't don't shy away from it. And certainly, most of the time, if you're a beginner or you're just going to your first couple of events, like, you're not going to get put on the clock by someone. A lot of the time, mostly play casual players after the first couple of rounds. So don't worry too much. And main thing, have fun. Come to events just to, even if you're not going to win, just to create your own narrative, enjoy playing your army, learn a lot, speak to a lot of other like sweaty, nerdy dudes for the weekend, and enjoy it.
Yeah, no, great advice. Yeah, the social aspect of the hobby is one of the best parts of the hobby. To wrap up substantive content questions, what is your favorite underutilized stratagem or unit or psychic power that maybe isn't that good in competitive play, or maybe is rarely seen, not never seen?
Yep. Yeah, I've been extolling the virtues of it online for the last couple of weeks. Ghostwalk is a power.
It's so good.
Ghostwalk adds +2 inches to your charge range, right? So that in itself isn't the be all and end all. Like, if you think about a Howling Banshee squad where on average you're charging something like 19 inches,
sure.
Adding 2 inches is like, plus 10%. Well, that's not the end of the world. But if you then stack it with Fate dice, it's on auto 6.
Yeah.
Then suddenly that enables 2 specific things. Firstly, it enables you to get a guaranteed charge out of Deep Strike.
Yeah.
And that's just absolutely bonkers in being able to basically pick and choose where you want to charge stuff. So that's good. Either stuff coming out of Falcons, like there's some quite good Ulthwe lists doing the rounds with like triple Falcon with Banshees or striking Scorpions in them. So that enables that really well, because you come in, you have a Fate dice, and to guarantee you can charge whatever you want on the table is crazy. The other bit is the Avatar, who's not necessarily slow. He still moves 10 inches. He can't advance and charge. But if you add in a Fate dice and Ghostwalk, his minimum threat range is 20 inches.
Yeah, he moves. Yeah.
which catches people off guard. And, a lot of maps like Death and Zeal or Conversion or whatever, he can get a turn 1 charge for sure. If you deploy him in the line, or Phantasmid. It also means that it's basically the same maths as having an advance and charge. Yeah. And if I told you that, you can run the Avatar with Fortune and by the way, he advance and charges, you'd think, oh my God, that's bonkers for that model. Like, you shouldn't be able to advance and charge. And that's almost what the maths of Ghostwalk does with a Fate dice, because 20-inch threat range is
crazy.
The same mathematically. So that's a bit of a sleeper. It's a pretty niche one. Like, it only has, I think, a couple of use cases. I wouldn't necessarily take it if I wasn't trying to get charges out of like Falcons or the Webway Gate or something, but still really cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. All right, final question. Slightly off color. What would you rather? Hypothetical thought experiment. You are a space elf. You are killed in glorious combat, and your waystone is tragically destroyed. What would you rather? Your disembodied elf ghost is hammered into a piece of armor and spends the next 1,000 years as a Noise Marine's Grundle protector? Or your disembodied elf ghost is put to work on a warp-tainted crone world cleaning out the hot tub filters in Fulgrim's Pleasure Palace?
I think the second one. I think at least in the hot tub, you're getting a bit of a scrub, trying to stay cool.
Yeah, you get to move around too.
Get to move around a bit.
Yeah, I think that's the right pick.
Yeah. And there we go. Take this where you didn't expect. If you get to the Pleasure Palace, then maybe if you find a way to escape, then you can go steal the last Crone Sword and complete the final puzzle to resurrect Neat.
Oh shit! You are so optimistic.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what you got to do. If you are an elf, you got to take that chance.
That you just put a positive. I thought this was like an unescapable, grimdark, awful Horns of the Bull thing, but you went between. That's awesome.
Yep. And only listeners of this podcast would actually get that reference. I think most people wouldn't. Maybe a lot of people didn't anyway, and I'm just way nerdier than I like to admit. But there's your little 40K pop culture.
Oh no, at least half of them got it. Okay, Brodie, thanks for being such a good sport about doing this, and especially about that last question, and for all of your insights and advice. Would you maybe be willing to jump on YouTube in like 5 or 6 days to answer questions that viewers might post in the comments?
Yeah, yep. Happy to. I'm also pretty active in a few Discords, like the Eldari Discord and the Goonhammer Discord, the Xenos
Cool.
channel within there.
Yeah, the Eldari Discord's great.
Love talking about 40k, so happy to.
Thank you. No, that's awesome, and I'll maybe also put, if it's cool with you, your list up in the video description so people have a little more context for what we're talking about.
We didn't even talk about the decannons either, by the way.
Yeah, but you know what? I have recently, when Boone talked about the decannons, I did a unit focus video on decannons a couple weeks ago. So I think people are probably good on decannons. But yeah, they're super good and super tactically clutch in Ulthwe lists. So, all right, everybody, if you like the video, please click like and consider leaving a question or a comment. If you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you'll subscribe. A special thank you to my patrons who not only enjoyed early access to this video and the opportunity to submit questions in advance, but who can also download WAV files of the videos to listen to them just like a podcast. So if you want to do that, patronage is the way forward. If you're interested in becoming a patron, I'll post a link in the video description. I should be back in a week or so with a new unit focus video. And until then, best of luck in your next campaign. Do you want to say bye to everyone, Brodie?
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, and great to be here, and see you at tournaments for all those UK listeners.
Thanks so much. Take care, guys. Bye.